And a good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for having us as we continue this conversation this evening. And for me personally, as a journalist, it's hard to believe that it was 4 years ago. But no story has touched me since, and even before that, there's never been a story that's touched me more deeply than what happened just a few blocks from here. Proximity-wise, I grew up in Columbia, so to think that something like that could happen so close to my hometown 4 years ago. Out of that, a community, this one, came together in a way that really has become a national model. I remember how proud I was to see the March on the Bridge and to see the vigils that popped up and the way that the people of Charleston and the people of this country rallied around this community. And also from that, there was an unlikely friendship born from tragedy. The two men who sit on the stage tonight. And we're going to spend some time talking to them. Pastor Manning, thank you for being here. Rabbi Myers, thank you for being here as well. In the hours and days after the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue outside Pittsburgh, you got, I would imagine, a number of emails from well-wishers all over the country, phone calls as well. And you get one from the pastorate, Mother Emanual. What was the email, and why did you decide to reply?
Well, first off, thank you for inviting me to be here. I've never been to Charleston before. I regretted such a short visit. I look forward to a lengthier visit at another occasion. I don't know why I was scrolling through emails on my phone. I can't answer that. There were thousands of them in those immediate days. And just scrolling, and if you scroll through emails on a smartphone, eventually the roll stops and it comes to rest somewhere. Well, apparently the divine finger had it stop on Pastor Manning's email. I looked at it, scratched my head, I don't know who this is, and pushed on it and read his email. And immediately I thought, wow, this is really lovely. I don't know this guy. I don't need more visitors in Pittsburgh. I've had enough visitors already that just won't leave us alone. So I emailed back, and that began an email conversation. And fortunately, Pastor was insistent and said, I'm coming, that's it. And he came to town the Friday after, which was the day that we were having the final funeral.
What compelled you?
Well, again, thank you for having me. What compelled, I remember October 27th, I remember calls that were coming in. I remembered October 28th, we were at Mother Emanual, sharing with the congregation the unthinkable has happened again. That Monday evening, I shared with the church leadership the feeling that I had that I should be there, that we should be there to comfort and to just be present. So I was wonderfully surprised when Rabbi had emailed me back, and I said, okay, so now I at least know that he will talk to me. And so I said, I really would like to be there for you, just to, we'll come in really low key, no press, no nothing. We just want to be there for you. Because I remember, though I came to serve Mother Emanual a year after the tragedy, it was there was no one who I could really draw from to say, okay, how do you handle this? How do you handle the preparation for the families? How do you handle trauma? How do you handle sermons? How do you handle people just expressing themselves? So I knew how I felt when I came to serve Mother Emanual, and I knew that Rabbi was a survivor, and he was also a victim, and then he was also a leader. So from the leadership perspective, I wanted to be there just to provide whatever type of counsel I could. So that's how it happened. And my wife and I flew out late Thursday night, got to Pittsburgh. Didn't know where we were going, but we got to where we needed to get to. And that Friday morning, Rabbi and I were able to have breakfast and to talk.
You provided what you describe as the ministry of presence.
Yeah, so the ministry of presence is just being there. And I'm reminded of the interview that I had shared. It's just to be there, to give a hug, to give a handshake, to give a tissue, to do whatever. But it's just to let them know that they are not alone.
Rabbi, during a conversation earlier today, we talked about mass shootings in this country, specifically at houses of worship, and you said something that stayed with me for the past few hours. You think we're going to see more of this. Why?
I don't say that from any empirical data. That's not my expertise. There's a Yiddish expression in your kishkas, which literally translates your intestines, but that doesn't, they'll say kishkas is far more colorful than intestines. I have a feeling in my kishkas that I wish I didn't have it, that we're not done seeing massacres in the United States. So I know that as much as I'd like to, if we look after what happened at Tree of Life, that didn't stop them being in the United States or, alas, in Christ Church as well. It's going to happen again in a house of worship. I just feel it. And I know well that when it does happen, both Pastor Manning and I will be there, just as he was there for me. We will be there to offer that ministry of presence to whomever the clergy will be in that house of worship.
One of the things I didn't realize until we started talking earlier today, when things like this happen, specifically at places of worship, those who lead those congregations have to preside over multiple funerals, and they are counseling families, victims' families, survivors for months and years. Who ministers the ministers? Who pastors the pastors? Who, besides God above, who do you talk to? From whom do you draw your strength? Who provides counsel?
So again, from a personal perspective, I was not at Mother Emanual right after the massacre. I got there a year later. But I found myself having to prepare congregation family members for the funerals. The court case. And in that process, I remember there were days specifically after some hard testimonies in court that I would come back to the house and I would just sit in darkness and just ponder. And I asked God to send or show me someone who could minister and help me through what I am going through. He did not come when I expected him to, because I wanted him to come while I was still ministering and sharing with families through the trials. But he allowed me to go share with Rabbi after his. And through that, we have now this kindred spirit where when I'm in his presence, he may not realize he's pouring back into me. And I would be so bold and presumptuous to say that when I'm in his presence, maybe I'm pouring back into him as well. But it's just God answering prayers. And we never want this group, so to speak, to ever grow in number. But then we also must be prepared that if and when it does happen again, that the same questions that a leader may have, the same struggles that a leader may have, the same challenges that a congregation, synagogue, mosque may have, we owe it to them to be there, to share with them, with the ministry of presence, and to pour back into them, to let them know that they are not alone.
To whom did you turn?
I remember reading an article several years ago, but I don't recall the source of it, that the title was, your question, who pastors the pastor? And I've been fortunate in my professional life that I've had a number of dear friends that have been around throughout my calling, but the one who answered the call was Pastor Manning. And just to share with all of you, some of you may have already heard me say this or read it, so I apologize for the repetition, that when we met that morning, I knew right away that this was not just an ordinary person, but this was someone really special. And towards the end of our conversation, he had asked if he could attend the funeral, which was that Friday at 1 o'clock. It was the last of the funerals of all 11. And I said to him at that point, no, you're not just going to attend, you're going to come with me, you're going to sit with me, you're going to read the 23rd Psalm, and then you're going to share words of comfort. Because I just knew, again, deep in my kishkas, that's the new word for today, that it was the right thing to do. So imagine the look on the face of 1,500, not all Jews, but mostly Jews in a synagogue, when a rabbi walks out with a minister from Mother Emanual AME. It looked a rather peculiar sort of moment for the congregation. When I got up to speak then, I then shared with everyone present that I believe in angels. And I'm sure that most of you looking at me will say, the rabbi's lost it. After 11 funerals, forget it. Let's just get the men with the white coat for him or some such sort of thing. And I said, but I do. And God sends them in times and places that we don't recognize. Well, God sent an angel to me, and the angel's name is Pastor Eric Manning. And I introduced him to the community. And I do believe that God did send an angel my way and continues to, and it's Pastor Eric Manning.
After the shooting last fall at Tree of Life Synagogue, there were a number of changes that were made, not necessarily legislative changes, but changes. You've talked about a change that you've made personally with regards to language and words that you use, words that you don't use. Talk to us a little bit about that and the power of words.
I came to the realization that what happened in my synagogue is just one expression of violence. There are many others, whether it's burning a cross on someone's lawn, hanging a noose in their locker in their place of employment, spray painting swastikas, beating up someone in the street because of their sexual orientation. All of those are the actions, but the foundation of them are words. Specifically, and I'll use the word once, hate. Now, why do I say use it once? I took an oath 2 weeks after the massacre in my synagogue at Point State Park. It's called Point State Park because it's the confluence of the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio rivers. If you're a sports fan, you may recall Three Rivers Stadium. That's where that point is. And at that time, I really didn't know what I was going to say, but God gave me some divine inspiration. And what I did is I took a pledge, and I said that the H word is a four-letter word. It's an obscenity. It doesn't belong in our vocabulary. It's too severe a word. If you just don't like something, say, I don't like it. For example, there might be people here who aren't enamored with Brussels sprouts. I happen to like them. But if you don't just say I H them, just say I don't like them, and keep it simple like that. If we reduce the severity of our speech, we reduce the likelihood that we'll be more extreme in emotional response afterwards. So I took a pledge then, and many have followed through on that don't use the word. It's a four-letter word. Put it in the trash can in your brain, and then empty out that little trash can icon, and don't ever use it again. But I'm also mindful. But I have a better idea. Thank you for the applause. Instead of applauding me, take the pledge. Applause is lovely. Thank you. Rabbis never get applause during our sermons. So, because that's not the Jewish way. They don't do that kind of stuff. So you're all invited next Sabbath to come to my place. But don't just applaud it. If you think it's meaningful, take the risk and take the pledge and not use it. But I also came to realize some other words. I don't use the word shoot anymore. It's taken on a different idea. So I just can't use it anymore. I just don't use the word killing. Like if you think a joke is really funny and they keep going and say, oh, you're killing me. I can't use a word like that anymore. So certain words that are connected now to the violence in my congregation, I'm mindful of, not only because it sits wrong with me, but I'm also mindful that it can and will impact other people who've been traumatized. And simple words really have a lot more impact. And the best way that I can model that to others is to not use that and have others then think, wow, you know, maybe I should think about what I say too. Imagine if we all thought more deeply about what we say. We could even make a better country than we have now, and isn't that what we all want?
Rabbi just mentioned the trauma of the victims, and here we are, just the day before the 4-year anniversary of the shooting, and we talked about something earlier, and I wanted to get you to follow up here. This idea that we commemorate tragedies in this country, and we remember the victims once a year. Is that perhaps as harmful as it is helpful?
I believe, as we said earlier, I think the whole aspect with the commemoration is remembering that in Mother Emanual's case, there were 9 families that were touched. You have a testimony, so to speak, of an empty seat. They go home and they are reminded that their loved one has been taken away from them. People come, commemorate, they hang out, they share, they take pictures, they ask questions, they go back home. What has just at that point happened, innocently and maybe unknowingly, they have re-traumatized that individual. I remember when I first started serving Mother Emanual, how we had someone come in and they were asking one of the members to take them through that day, and they just kept asking questions upon questions, and I looked at the person's face and their countenance began to change and became overwhelmed, and I stepped in and I said, I think we're done here. And they said, well, I said, I respect that you want to know, and I respect you, but what you've just done is you have placed that person now back, we don't know how far, because they were re-traumatized again. And it's never to say that we should forget. I want to make sure that I'm very clear in that. We should remember the lives mattered, the survivors matter. We should never forget. But we should also be cognizant of the fact that this happened, that families are still living each day of their lives being reminded of the trauma that has happened. And I think that if we can remember that during these commemorations, as we do, to pray for the family's strength, to pray for the community's strength, then we can find that right balance. But I think we have to be mindful of the trauma that families and survivors have gone through.
How do you feel personally about, as you just alluded to, the church itself has become a stop for a lot of folks who want to take pictures, who want to come inside and just see Mother Emanual. How do you feel about that?
It's a good question.
They kind of pay me to ask them.
Yeah, and you got that good one. First and foremost, we are immensely humbled where people will come and to want to visit and to be a part and to take pictures. We understand that there is a desire to come and to see. We get that. When the church members are doing tours, then we also use it as a launching pad to tell the story of Mother Emanual. Mother Emanual was founded and established in 1818. And then as the Bethel Circuit, and that's where we start. And we go through the history, we go through the challenges, we go through the resiliency, we go through racism, we go through Jim Crow, we go through everything, and then we get to June 17th, 2015. Mother Emanual has been in existence before for almost 200 years, but something happened that we never thought would happen at a church, at a house of worship. We then tell the story. We then tell what has happened with the families, what has happened with the members. So we don't necessarily get tired. We find now that this is an opportunity for continued ministry. And as I shared with the congregation before, when your influence or ministry has been enlarged and your territory has been enlarged, then God requires of us to do more, to continue to share that there is indeed more that unites us than divides us, to share that we are all created in the image of God, to say that even though a racist came into our sanctuary or into our Bible study to tear us apart, we are stronger because we have risen, because we have embraced. And then we pray that that same strength, that same resiliency will kick into a community, that we will move past hope and start to believe that even though it may happen again, we believe that it won't. But if it does, we'll be ready. Not matching those weapons with anything that is of this world, but engaging with love, forgiveness, compassion, grace, and mercy.
I'm making sure I choose my words carefully after what you just said. While the shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue was the deadliest of its kind in our country's history, there have been more acts of the H word, specifically targeting members of the Jewish faith, specifically targeting Jews in this country. To what do you attribute what would seem to be a rise of anti-Semitism in America? Or is that an overstatement?
Or is that what?
Or is that an overstatement? Do you not believe that there necessarily has been a rise in anti-Semitism in America?
For certain there is. There has been. There are people far more knowledgeable in that than I am, who can cite numbers, statistics, et cetera, and so forth. But yes, there has been a rise. I think it would be simplistic of me to say that there's one root cause, but if you look over the panoply of history, you see that one of the oldest H words in existence in the world has been anti-Semitism. As long as there have been Jews, there has been anti-Semitism. To come at one root cause, I don't think is doable. I think there are many causes for it, but I really look at the greater picture of What does that say about any person's own humanity when they feel that they must treat someone else differently than they themselves would want to be treated, aka the golden rule? It's simple enough to follow. If you can't follow it, it says more about who you are than the people that you feel that you must speak ill about, harm in some way, or even murder. And I think it questions more of the lack of humanity in society when we need to find ways to speak ill of any other person because we think we're allowed to do it because we're a human being. And I think it calls to question who people are when they behave that way. And while, yes, anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it's the greatest form of the H word that we have in the United States, there are other forms as well where people find it necessary to select a group and make them the other, to minimize them, to do all sorts of horrid things in whatever name they feel it necessary. And I think it's a bigger question of what's becoming of America that we see a rise in all these forms of the H word. To me, that's the bigger question, and I think part of the answer is we need to all really look deeply in the mirror and see who are we, what do we do that we can promote the mistreatment of our fellow human beings. Because I think if we all think about it, each of us has some sort of bias in who we are. The question is, what do you do with that bias? If you keep it to yourself, good, be selfish. But if you wind up expressing it to others, then you really got to take a look at who am I and what is my place on this planet? Is this the legacy I want to leave when I'm no longer here?
Pastor, I'm being mindful of the time because I know you have an event tonight at Mother Emanual, and I also know what happens when pastors show up late for church events. So we don't want to get you in any trouble. So quickly here, 2 more questions. In terms of how we have, as a city, as a state, as a country, as a society, how we have honored those lives that were lost in the basement of that church that night. Where are we on that? Have we done, are we doing enough to honor those lives?
Why does it seem like you want to get me with the hard questions?
We have a finite amount of time. I didn't want to waste them on softballs. I asked you those earlier for the TV interview.
Gotcha. So, from a country perspective, I would say from a community perspective as well, we have a lot more work to do. We haven't forgotten the Emanual 9, the survivors, but we're not embracing each other with that spirit of forgiveness. I've said before that forgiveness is, within our faith tradition, is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It means that I will pick up the mantle and I will forgive. We joke about the easiness of it when we're talking with others. Yeah, you can, if you're experiencing road rage, you can forgive that person who cuts you off quickly, or you could give them, as we have said before, that one finger salute. You all know what I'm talking about. But we need to embrace forgiveness. What is required for that? It's to have the dignity to have a dialogue with someone who may not look like you, think like you, walk like you, talk like you. To have the dignity to have a decent conversation, not raising or going tit for tat, raising the level, but doing the best to bring everything down. We're not always going to agree, but we can agree to disagree in a civilized manner, in a way that will help people see that there is more that unites us than divides us. And I think when we can get back to that point, when we can understand that our words matter, when we can understand that life and death are in the power of the tongue, when we can understand that I'm going to choose this day to say that I love you, not just say it, but I'm going to show it. Even if you don't agree with me, I'm still going to show you love, because I believe and I understand that when we meet each other on that level, our communities will change. Not just our communities, our cities will change. Not just our cities, our states will change. Not just our states, but our nation will change and our world will change. But it begins by remembering the lives that were taken and making sure that that atrocity does not fade away, but we continue to allow for it to change our lives and to be better human beings.
One of the things that it's not lost on me, I don't think it's lost on anybody else in the music hall here, is the irony of the two of you sitting here. And I can't help but think that both of the shooters, this is precisely the opposite of what they hope to achieve. So to take tragedy and out of that, this friendship and this advocacy, thank you both for being here tonight to share that with us. We'll let you get back over to the church so you don't get in trouble. And Rabbi, thank you, thank you, thank you.